Well, hey, folks, welcome to another Soothkeep live stream. Tonight we have a very special guest, Pete Garcia. Pete, welcome aboard.
Thanks, man. It's been too long.
Yeah, I know. There's been so much going on lately, and every one of my friends is so busy, it's hard to even get a word in edgewise to connect with them. It's just crazy.
And you too. I mean, you're always how long you've been like just on the road nonstop for months now, it seems like.
Yep. And I'm leaving again Saturday for 2 weeks in Brazil.
Oh wow. That's crazy.
Yeah. It's been really rough road trying to keep the videos pumped out with the live streams and trying to write and trying to continue researching. But at least it's encouraging to find everywhere I go hungry souls who are hungry for the prophetic word for the whole counsel of God.
Yes, amen.
Well,
Amen.
the subject, Pete, that we're talking about tonight is, as I mentioned in the email, is this resurgence in America that we see, this whole Make America Great thing. And a lot of stuff's been standing out to me, both her obvious military superiority with her weaponry, much of which is highly secretive and rarely, if ever, used, and then her determination to come out on top of the King of the Hill game with AI and quantum computing. So let's give an introduction to folks who are listening here by touching on the superiority that was manifested in Venezuela. Maybe you'd take that up for us.
Yeah, so the Venezuela operation was clearly a show of force. And, we didn't need all that firepower to go in there and take out Maduro the way we did. I reckon much smaller package could have done it. It may have been at a little greater risk, but I think what was done there was done to demonstrate to the world that the U.S. is the preeminent superpower on the planet. And there's not anybody that even comes close. I mean, in terms of just military spending on our defense budget, the U.S. is nearly spending $1 trillion, and the next closest one is China at $315 billion, and then below that is Russia at like $150 billion. So we basically are way, way ahead of everybody else in terms of how much money and energy and resources we put toward national defense. But it was an aviation. It was a multi component operation. You obviously had the ships down there in the Caribbean off the coast of Venezuela doing a lot of the intervention between the drug runners. And every time they'd hit one of those boats, they have all kind of sonar and acoustic and audio and intel gathering data on those ships. So they'd blow up one of those little drug running boats. Cell phones would start ringing and like who's calling who. We could pick all that stuff up, so we know who's talking to who. We're also situated over there to the left of the Cayman Islands. So the Cayman Islands has the British offshore banking network going through there, which much of the narco drug money, about nearly $400 billion, flows through that every year. So we're doing a lot of. We weren't just parking those ships out there to sit. I mean, they were a show of force to begin with, but they're also collecting data, collecting information on everything that's going on in those areas. Then we launched a cyber attack. Then we launched these energy attacks against their grids, and we flew about 150 aircraft stacked, at every layer of the atmosphere, from stealth bombers at I don't even know what altitude they'd be flying at, but that's probably classified, but all the way down to like drones, over the houses and the military complexes there. And they flew in helicopters. They flew in these Delta Force guys that were using these sonic, like acoustic weapons, basically just demobilizing anybody that was in front of them to the point where they were writhing on the floor, like immobilized, bleeding out of every orifice. Pretty painful situation, but that was all done as a show of force. By collecting that and collecting Maduro and his wife, they also set in motion a chain of events. So this attack was pretty significant in a number of ways. I mean, Maduro is a run-in-the-mill tin-pot dictator, but he had his fingers into a lot of different things, and he had his fingers tied up with the Russians and the Chinese, who had provided him with their defense weapons. and systems, the air defense aerial denial systems. Then he was also running these ghost fleets, that were moving a lot of the oil that had been coming out of embargoed countries for Iran, for Russia. And then they were a foothold or a toehold for China to move into the South America. They had, that day that they did this raid, the Chinese had a Chinese envoy there that they'd come to like 600 agreements that China was going to be able to do stuff inside of Venezuela. So they denied that, and then now Cuba's cut off. So it had this chain reaction of events, even going so far as to what we're seeing today with the Fulton County in Georgia, with them going in, the FBI and Tulsi Gabbard going in and securing all of those voting records from 2020 because Maduro, was complicit with a lot of these voting machines and things like that. So this attack on Venezuela, again, one of the things that a lot of people don't talk about, it wasn't designed to be a regime change. It is a regime change in a sense, but he left those people, and he left the vice president, he left all those people in charge because we learned our lesson from Iraq. You can't go in and take out Saddam Hussein and then take out all of his leadership, and then what results is chaos, militias, and the rise of terrorist gangs and things like that. So they left most of the regime in place, took out the head, and they said, look, you're going to do what we're going to tell you to do, or else we're going to do the same thing to you. And it was so frightening what the U.S. did and it was so overpowering that, those guys are going to be dancing to the tune of the United States until there is no more United States at that point, or until that happens. So it was definitely a show of force. It showed the world. It showed Europe. The U.S. is the preeminent superpower on the planet. It showed the Russians. It showed the Chinese. In fact, the Chinese now are in the kind of a middle of their own kind of military meltdown between Xi and his top generals. This thing had a huge chain reaction to it. So, yeah, I think that's what I could add to that.
I did have a couple questions that came up. You had talked about the sonic weapon that was used by Delta. Now, was Delta carrying this? Was this like a squad level weapon or a personal carry weapon? Or is this something that was mounted bigger? I mean, did they have to land a gun jeep, or was it shot from a helicopter? How did this thing work? Or does anybody know?
Well, I'm sure they can mount them to vehicles and to aircraft, but I think these were hand carried. Or okay. it may have come from aircraft overhead, but that seemed more like a some of one of the guards was reporting that they were shooting some type of gun that was shooting 300 rounds a minute. I mean, just an insane amount of firepower coming out. They took out these 20 Delta Force guys. And for those folks that aren't familiar with Delta Force, they are probably the most secretive of the top tier special operating forces out there, more than the SEALs, more than anybody else. I mean, they are the elite of the elite. And I would imagine that they also had some guys carrying those things as well. They probably had guys carrying both, like some type of a chain gun as well as these acoustic weapons that were just demobilizing or immobilizing rather, the Cuban security guard that Maduro surrounded himself with. So I think they took out somewhere in the neighborhood of like 100 security forces, of which I think 40 to 50 were Cuban intel officers. So pretty devastating impact on the psyche of anybody that came across those guys that night. In fact, we got the guy's report that came out on X. One of the survivors of that event was so terrified, and that tweet or whatever, however it came out initially, that interview, it went all through Latin America. They really quickly began to change the minds of the president of Mexico, Sheinbaum, and the president of Colombia, and anybody else that thought about stepping up to Trump. They've quickly changed their tunes. In fact, I mean, the president of Colombia was like, a few days after the event was talking all kind of smack. And then as soon as Trump turned and looked at him and started coming out, he said, hey, we could do the same thing to you. He booked a trip to Washington to go sit down and have a conversation with him. So
that's pretty crazy. So when I was in the Ranger Battalion, one of my buddies, after he was in the Rangers, went to Delta. And probably the vast majority of what he did under Delta, even years later, he was not allowed to talk about.
Yeah.
But one of the things that came out one time was that they would do practice missions. One of their missions was suitcase nukes, even though, America kind of claimed we didn't have such a thing. But they were always planning missions like how to get dropped into Russia and take out targets, get dropped into China, take out targets with suitcase nukes. And so to practice that, they would have to do stuff like practice infiltrating an area where there's guards, and you'd have to sneak around the guards, not be seen, not be heard. Mm-hmm. Pretty crazy.
Yeah. I watched a lot of their videos, just like on their accessions, program, just to get into Delta. And they, were most like, if you have Rangers or SEAL teams, they may have 100 candidates and, half of them make it in. A lot of these Delta classes, they'll have like 100 people and like only one makes it in. Some classes, they don't have any out of 100. They won't take them. And it's all individual effort. Like those guys, when you go into SEAL training, and I'm not a SEAL, but I'm just watching videos on how they do their training, their accessions program and stuff like that. It's, it's a lot of it's teamwork, and a lot of it is built around working together. And then you can kind of build off everybody can build off each other's energy. We see somebody being motivated, and it motivates you, and it's kind of contagious. But the Delta Force, I think in some aspects, Special Forces is kind of the same way, where it's really mostly about the individual. What do you have to take? What can you do on your own when you have nothing and you have no guidance, no information? You just keep going. So it's it's pretty challenging from what I understand.
No, when you were talking earlier about America's domination on military superiority, just looking at spending, I read recently that America is upping her spending to 1.25 trillion per year, and her spending is more than the next 10 nations combined.
Yeah.
This is mind-boggling. Yeah. But even just looking at 1 year, that's mind-boggling. But when you look at this kind of superiority for 2 decades in a row, where you're outspending the rest of the world, I mean, you're leapfrogging every year farther and farther and farther in front of the Chinese and the Russians. And to me, that's mind-boggling. But what's also crazy is this sonic weapon that you were talking about. I don't know much of the details about this thing, but obviously this is one of these technologies that's been available for a while, and it's been quite secretive, and now it's public knowledge.
Yeah, here's what this guard said, and I'm reading from his interview. He says, the interviewer asked, so do you think the rest of the region should think twice before confronting Americans? And the security guard says, without a doubt, I'm sending a warning to anyone who thinks that they can fight the United States. They have no idea what they're capable of. After what I saw, I never want to be on the other side of that again. They're not to be messed with. And the interviewer asked, and now that Trump has said Mexico is on the list, do you think the situation will change in Latin America? And the security guard says, definitely. Everyone is already talking about this. No one wants to go through what we went through. Now everyone thinks twice. What happened here is going to change a lot of things, not just in Venezuela, but throughout the region. And one of the things that I think is interesting is that if you go back and watch some movies from like, I don't know, the first Trump administration, that time frame, there was a movie called Sicario. It was pretty realistic movie about the drug cartels and the border battles that were going on with human trafficking and drugs and all that. And the cartels seemed pretty vicious. And I just remember thinking for all that time, like, man, could the U.S. go in there and like really take them out? Because all we had known was at that point, this is the teens, the 20 teens, that, we had gone through insurgencies before, like we did in Iraq and we did in Afghanistan. And we know that we don't want to get bogged down in insurgency, but I think the technology is now to the point that we could knock out things pretty fast. We would not be bogged down again, anything like that. Even if we chose to go into a place, things have changed so much with the technology. We are so far ahead of things now. We've learned so much from just 20 years at war. Uh, I don't foresee us ever being in that situation again, getting bogged down anywhere like that.
So, can you touch on a few of the advantages we have, for instance, on our fifth and sixth gen aircraft? To me, that's a mind-blowing domination factor right there.
Yeah. So the U.S. has long, prided itself in mastering, being a master of all the domains. So we saw in the early part of the 20th century that we dominated. Well, we could go to the 19th century. We dominated the land. It was all about the first empire of America was really from about 1800 to about 1898, and that was the first iteration of America, and it was all about expansion. So soil equal power. So everything was geared around claiming more and more of the continent, which we did. We had a devastating war in the Civil War, which obviously is our greatest war that we've ever fought because it was Americans fighting Americans. It had the highest death toll of any of the wars we fought. But I think at that point we were, had we had to fight another nation on our land like that, we would have won pretty quickly. Because we learned a lot of lessons. And every war that we get into, we learn our lessons. We learned from the Revolutionary War, guerrilla tactics that we copied from the Native Americans and how they fought. We didn't fight the British. Most of the time, we did not fight the British how the British wanted to fight. Sun Tzu once wrote that you never fight the enemy on the ground they prepared. So you're always going to look for whatever advantage you can. And from 1898 forward, it was really power shifted from land to now it became all about access. So we really focused on making ourselves a blue water, having a blue water navy that could travel around, go to all the ports, and that could open up trade. That gives us military dominance because we had two oceans, one on each side that we had to now defend. And then from 1945 on, it became about influence. And we did that through a number of ways: money, technology, culture. We helped Europe with NATO, basically be in their defense so that they didn't have to spend all their money, building up their armies or defense again. They could just focus on rebuilding their structure and their society. And all that time we were doing that, we were getting engaged in conflicts. And every conflict that we got engaged in, big or small, we took those lessons learned and we began to build our own military and apply those lessons to how to fight. So by the time, you got to think by the end of Vietnam, we were very fluent in fighting counterinsurgencies in, tropical climates, and we became very proficient. We won almost every one of those battles. We lost the war in the sense of like the politics of it and the popular opinion of leaving there. And I think the political will was lost. But every conflict we've ever been in, we've basically learned the lessons from those, and we learned how to shape our fighting and our tactics and techniques to dominate. So the 20th century was all about dominating land, sea, and air. And once the Manhattan Project proved successful, and we split the atom and we weaponized the atomic bomb, or we made the atomic bomb and we used that against Hiroshima and Nagasaki, against the Imperial Japanese. Then we demonstrated to the world that we had the resolve to use the weapons that we make. To my knowledge, I think we're the only ones thus far that have used a nuclear weapon against another enemy in conflict like that.
Yeah, to me, I saw a question come up in the chat line already, and the question was asked: how do we know that we're the only ones with this technology?
Well, as far as other like nations like China, for example, I think their navy is larger than ours. But if their technology in Venezuela, they supposedly had this very high tech, aerial denial air defense systems that we just disabled very quickly and rendered them inert right off the bat. A lot of what their technology is very it's reverse engineered because it's mostly stolen from other people, and so their navy might be large, but I would say half of their ships would barely function and probably not make it past Taiwan in terms of making it out through the Pacific. They're pretty shoddy in terms of that. They have whole cities in China that people can't even live in those cities. They're empty because the concrete is so poor that a tiny little earthquake and all those buildings would come down. There was a video of guys, it's forbidden. You're not even supposed to go there, but like they're walking around and the Chinese guys are showing the concrete that they use to build all these major structures, and it's just like you can kick it with your foot and the concrete shatters. And so. Yeah, their military, their weapon, their rocket systems that they had, they found a great number of their missiles that they had that were supposed to be used and ready for war. In their fuel tanks were filled with water. They didn't even have fuel in them, so because they didn't have the fuel to put in there. So a lot of China is big, but a lot of their systems are really crappy. And then we saw from Russia going into Ukraine, Russia should have just steamrolled Ukraine, and they couldn't, and they didn't. Here they are now, 4 years later, still slogging it out. Thousands of men and civilians and soldiers dying every month there for, I don't know for what. But so I think when this happened, this show of force was a clear demonstration to the world that the U.S. is back, and that we, after the shameful withdrawal we did out of Afghanistan in 2021, I mean, it looked like the U.S. was definitely on the downward slide. But the fourth empire that we're coming into, and what Trump wants to dominate in, and what he wants to make America dominate in, is being essential. And being essential means that the world needs us. In anything that they want to do going forward, they're going to need us. Kind of in the way that we had with the U.S. dollar as the global reserve currency, but now currency is so diversified between crypto and all different, the BRICS basket of currencies and gold and all the precious metals and commodities, etc. You can't force people to use the dollar when we have like 38 trillion in debt. So we had to find some other way. And that other way is the stack, AI, it's the software, hardware, the data centers, both on Earth and in space, as well as the AI. And we want to dominate that. So if anybody else wants to use it, they've got to go through us. And then you take all of those systems, and most of them have dual use, military, civilian dual use capabilities. So like the satellites, we would go fund Musk to the tune of $200 billion to launch. He's launching like hundreds and hundreds of satellites every year into space. I think he's up to like 9,000 or almost 10,000. And those satellites have dual use weapons capability. If we need them, and that they're going to be integral and part of like the Golden Dome. And so the whole thing with the Golden Dome is like, if we have our ground stations placed at different places, primarily like in Greenland, for example, and we have these satellites going over the Earth, anytime, like say China launched a missile, they were going to launch a nuclear missile against the United States, it wouldn't even make it out of the atmosphere before it was detonated by one of those Golden Dome satellite lasers shooting down. And so we've effectively wiped out mutually assured destruction. This whole doctrine that had guided us through 70 plus years of the Cold War, we've exceeded that. We've grown past that in leaps and bounds. So other nations definitely have strong points. I'm not saying that all the other nations are worthless or anything like that. I'm not in terms of their military. There's some good militaries out there, Israel, for example. But they're not anywhere close to what the U.S. can do. And so another thing that is going to set the U.S. apart from any other nation is how do we win World War II? We were able to outproduce our enemies. In terms of Japan and Germany, we could produce more tanks and more ships and more planes when we put our economic engine behind the war effort than any other nation could by a long mile. And so Trump wants to turn that back to get the economic advantage by reducing these acquisition process timelines. There's a great movie. I don't know who streams it anymore, but like it's called the Pentagon Wars, and it's talking about the life cycle of a Bradley tank or a Bradley fighting vehicle. And it started out in the 1950s, and by the time it was actually rolled out and used by soldiers, like the 1980s, it had gone through so many iterations, and it's the perfect test case, like what not to do, And so this idea of making these one system that one company makes, that it takes that, from idea, from the barroom napkin to rolling it out on the flight line or onto, the testing range or whatever. They want to take that from years to like a year. So the whole acquisition process, and if that means making vehicles and stuff that are less technologically complicated or expensive, that's fine. We can produce more tanks that roll off the assembly line and do their purpose. That doesn't necessarily have all the bells and whistles, but they'd still be better than what we had in the first and second, third generations of tanks and whatnot. So they're looking at this from every angle, everything from the economy through energy, through the military, through tariffs, it is a all hands, all domain effort to secure the United States as the number one superpower for the next 50 years, 100 years, if they can do it.
So it's interesting to me too. Just in the matter of aircraft, there are a few other nations out there that have fifth gen aircraft, or what's called fifth gen aircraft. Russia has a handful, China has a handful. But when we've gotten a good look at their abilities, their flying abilities, their weapon capabilities, what we have come to realize is that these are just cheap knockoffs of American fifth gen designs. Mm-hmm. And they look the same, and on some levels, some of them are relatively fast, but they don't have the fine tuning. They don't have the weapon system. They don't have the high tech aspects of it. So really, they're only like a 4.5 gen aircraft. Nobody's aircraft matches our fifth gen aircraft, except for the nations that we've sold fifth gen to. But even then, we often limit the technology that we give them access to. The only one that's really flying fifth gen that's equivalent to ours is Israel, and maybe on a few points it might even be beyond ours.
Yeah,
they now take we're going out for sixth gen. Yeah, crazy.
Yeah, and a lot of these systems now are going autonomous, without pilots. So the AI is to the point now where they can fly these. Anduril has created a fifth or sixth gen autonomous jet, like stealth jet, that doesn't need a pilot. And not only do we have, not only has this idea of autonomous or lethal autonomous weapon systems really kind of come into the forefront in just the last couple of years, but you look at just the drones and the variety of drones that are existing now in the world. There used to be about 20 or 30 different kinds, and now there's who knows, over 100 different kinds, and everything from like insectoid type things to things that swim underwater, things that crawl underground, that run on 4 legs, run on 2 legs, everything. And a lot of these systems now can have AI software in them that basically they don't need human commands to guide them. They can act, however they're programmed to act. So, and not only that, but they can also hive mind these drones to work as one. We see a lot of that with the light shows they do for like New Year's Eve and whatnot. Thousands of these drones all flying in unison and making images and whatnot. We have the technology now to do all that. We didn't even have that a few years ago. So that is definitely changing the nature of warfare in a lot of ways that were unheard of in previous generations. And also the thing too is this idea of mosaic warfare, turning everything is a sensor. So you don't have to put all your eggs in this one basket for this one tank. You can take a fraction of that money and then make a handful of other things a sensor, and they can detonate or they can do whatever you program them to do. So mosaic warfare has also changed the idea of how we fight and the nature of how we fight. So, and then you look at just the human soldier. the technology that's going into advancing and equipping a soldier. They've got these, Andural's got this helmet now called Eagle Eyes that basically you like put on these glasses, you know, and you've got your helmet on. It's got sensors that's paired up with a drone overhead. You don't have to look at the drone. You don't have to look at an iPad anymore. You're seeing it through your glasses, and it's also giving you the ability to like look in like infrared or white hot, black hot. You can look through metal objects. It's crazy. It's insane the stuff that they have now that soldiers are going to be wearing and using in whatever conflict comes next. I bet they probably had some of that. I'm sure they used some of that on that raid, but it wasn't just Delta Force. They had Delta Force. They had some law enforcement, DEA, and probably who knows, a smattering of all the other guys, top tier guys from different law agencies, so they could call it a lawful, getting a police warrant, going out there and getting this guy for criminal charges. So,
Well, one other thing I've been thinking about, there was a lot of concern in the last few years over drones changing warfare and maybe taking away America's tactical advantage. And I think if we'd have been attacked by drones 4 or 5 years ago, 3 years ago, that might have been a different story. But some of the technology I've been looking at that we are actually fielding now, mounting it on ships, and within a year or two, it's going to be on all of our destroyers. We have both the Helios system and a Meteor system. Are you familiar with either of those?
Which one is microwave?
The microwave is the Meteor system.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that one.
That one's pretty crazy. I mean, a 50-degree cone that when it goes out, it can take down a swarm of dozens, even hundreds of drones at 10 to 12, 15 miles away.
Yeah.
One microwave burst, and you don't need some of the technology in the past. They thought, well, this is so energy hoggish that you'd have to have nuclear reactor just to charge it. But now these are able to use just the Rolls-Royce generators on a destroyer. And so you turn all the unnecessary lights down and stuff dims a little bit when these things kick up. But one major shot and boom, 15 miles away, the drones drop.
Yep. Yeah, it's kind of like the phalanx. You know how the phalanx used to be, or I guess they still have phalanx on the ships, and those things that just shoot those insane amount of rounds. I don't know how many rounds they shoot a minute, 1,500 rounds a minute or some insane amount. That used to be their main defense against incoming projectiles coming against the ship, missiles or whatever. But yeah, those microwave bursts. So yeah, drones would have been problematic a few years ago. They're not going to be anymore. Same thing with what Israel's doing with their Iron Dome, shooting the missiles down with lasers and whatnot. So yeah, that technology is advancing. The U.S. actually, we have a lot of patents for a lot of technologies. I'm writing about in this new book I'm doing with Terry James. And there's probably about a dozen patents that, if I listed them off, they sound like science fiction, but there has to be a degree of probability that these things could be theoretically usable. And we're already seeing some of them starting to come out, that DARPA and ARPA and all these other secret squirrel agencies have, in their black budgets. But yeah, there's a lot of technologies. I would say that we're probably way ahead of everybody else by years.
One thing that's interesting too is Trump wants to bring the battleships back. And I've often thought battleships would be awesome if you had a man with rail guns. And I think that's the plan. And they're rolling out the rail gun. The plan is 2028. So on a rail gun, you could have 10 times more ammunition on a battleship than you would have in the ancient days. And because now all you're shooting is the projectile itself, that's the ordnance. You don't have to have this massive brass shell and all the powder or whatever they're going to use the propellant. So pretty crazy.
Yeah, chain guns they are pretty insane. I've seen those things shoot. They are, man, I would not want to be on the receiving end of those things.
Well, now some of the self-loading ones they have, where you just have these big racks, and they can fire like a massive round like every 2 seconds, including uh, you can the gun can walk, so it can drop around 40 yards of the side, 40 yards of the side, just tink, 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 tink.
Yeah,
Crazy.
yeah, it's impressive to see them shoot. But that begs the question. I was thinking about this earlier today, and regarding where the U.S. is in prophecy.
Yes.
And for me, it's like you have two questions: either the U.S. is mystery, comma Babylon, or she doesn't exist at all.
Yeah, I agree. You don't really have any other options.
Yeah.
Because if we're in the picture, nobody else can compete. If someone else is going to come up, we can't be there.
Yeah. And then the second point is the U.S. is so powerful right now. How long would it take another nation to come along to go beyond that, to exceed past where we are today, to be the beast kingdom of Revelation 13? So I don't know. I have a hard time. I don't. I think that if the rapture does decimate the United States, the U.S. will still be here.
Yeah.
But it won't be the United States of America anymore. It'll be called something else. It'll be given a new name or a new role to play. And all of those technologies and all of that capital and all of those resources and all that just it gets absorbed into the beast kingdom, into whatever final fashion it looks like. So
yeah, I've often considered that's a legit possibility too. The one thing I think about, like right now, our two biggest competitors are China and Russia. And yet, in my mind, this last day's beast empire, whatever else it is, it has to have a Roman base for its footprint. I mean, it can be expanded from there, but that generic footprint has to be there. Russia doesn't fit that, and China doesn't fit that. So I don't see them as options for that beast empire. But when you start thinking about Europe, America would have to be out of the picture if Europe is going to rise. Either that or Europe would have to have like a 2-decade miracle.
And that's not to say, it's not to say that they couldn't. Let's say the rapture happened today.
Yep.
And I would think there's a period of time where things are pretty chaotic as the world is thrust into this new world where the U.S. is in complete meltdown. We got a glimpse of that with Biden in office for the last 4 years. We got a glimpse of what the world looks like when the U.S. is not leading. It just, things become very chaotic around the world. And our enemies are no longer afraid to act. They just do what they're going to do, like the Russians did in Ukraine. And the Chinese were going to do that. They were going to, if the letter that Xi's top general, he got arrested, but he had a letter that was published before. He said, if I ever get arrested, publish this thing or send it out. And he said that their plan was to go into Taiwan after Russia made their move on Ukraine. That way the attention of the world's forces would just be split in half. They couldn't devote their energies against one or the other. And the Russians did so poorly, kind of starting out, that they had second thoughts. And then as soon as it kind of started to drag on, they're like, yeah, we're going to wait. So
yeah. Well, to me, it's really amazing. The only thing really that saved Ukraine was American money and technology, with some help from Europe for money and technology too. But it was that Western tech. It was Roman tech.
Well, the U.S., I mean, you think about it this way. The U.S. is a combination really of kind of four entities. We're Greco-Roman in structure, in political makeup, in philosophy, in politics. And we're also British and I would say Latin. And when I say Latin, I mean Spanish and French, kind of take both of those together. And so we're a hodgepodge of different nations, melting like a melting pot of nations all brought together. So if you think about Revelation 13, the beast that's coming out of the sea of nations, the sea of peoples, you've got this chimera animal that it's got the feet of a bear, the mouth of a lion, the spots of a leopard, and it's got 7 heads, 10 horns, 10, like, it's a chimera. It's a mix of different things. And the U.S., what is the U.S.? We are a melting pot of every other culture kind of that formed our own culture. And we based it on those kind of 4 identities, the Greco-Roman, British, and Latin, as well as the Judeo-Christian morality applied on top of that, which has allowed our nation to really flourish in a way that other nations couldn't. At least it gave our forefathers the foresight to write the Constitution in such a way that it would survive, a few centuries. Whereas the French Revolution, the Germans, Austro-Hungarians, like every other country was kind of rising and falling within every few decades. It was a new regime in charge. But the U.S., even the British have been trying to divide the United States since the Revolution. They've never let that go. I don't care what. No offense to any Brits out there, but like the War of 18. We had the Revolutionary War, the War of 1812. They were all on board with dividing. They're supporting the Confederacy to get the U.S. to keep, and the French were, I guess, were too. One of the two. They were on board with siding with, because for them a weaker United States was better for them.
Yeah.
Because then they could just exploit whichever side that they supported. So with Abraham Lincoln keeping the nation together, it really kind of spoiled their plan. So then they turned to Plan B, which was to supplant the United States from inside out through the Federal Reserve. They kept trying to push the Federal Reserve on the United States, which would create essentially like a central bank for the U.S., which we finally got in 1913 under Woodrow Wilson. And, you had all of the liberalism, progressivism, socialism, all the isms coming out of Europe into American universities and seminaries and other places that kind of infiltrated, and that began the slow rot from inside out. So we've been living under this kind of guise now for the last 100 plus years. And I think really, and not to toot his horn too much, but there's been a few people that have started to call these things out. Reagan started to call these things out. Goldwater before him, then Reagan, obviously Trump. But Trump is surrounded with people that are looking at the situation and thinking like, why are we doing this? This doesn't work. Why do we keep doing the same things over and over, thinking that it's going to be any different the next time? So that's why they brought back the Monroe Doctrine. That's why they're exerting dominance in Western Hemisphere. They want to kick the Chinese out, the Russian out, the Brits out, everybody else out, and just basically make the United States. It's going to look like those maps, like the Club of Rome put together back in the 70s, where the U.S., it's like Mexico, America, Canada, Greenland. It's going to look like that.
So that brings up another interesting thing for me. Well, 2 points. First of all, I saw today that Trump has made his pick to head the Fed because he's tired of where it's been going. But I did read someone comment that the man that he's picked to replace is part of the Bilderberger Group, which, I mean, this is a global cabal entity. At least that's how it's generally regarded. So it's kind of interesting to me that Trump still has many people deeply involved in the global cabal, in his cabinet, in his close connections, in his 3-letter agency picks, in his Fed picks. Pretty crazy.
Yeah, they said that about Scott Bessent, because he had ties to the World Economic Forum, but he's basically been doing everything Trump's asked him to do enthusiastically.
Yep.
So a lot of those guys at that level, they've worn many hats. They've been involved with many groups. They've been involved in many organizations and corporations and agencies and whatnot. So
some of them seem to be kind of politically neuter, really, isn't it? I mean, they're attracted to money and attracted to power.
Yeah. Well, Trump's got both in spades right now. So but whoever he has is going to be better than Jerome Powell. He's going to have somebody that does what he wants him to do in terms of interest rates and all that stuff. So to kind of spur back the economy. And Jerome Powell is still kind of stuck in the old guard, and he doesn't want to change, and he's still kind of like the Bushes and the Cheneys and the old dynasties that were trying to hold on to the third industrial age, trying to drag it out a little bit more. It doesn't work anymore. And so Trump has just embraced this new reality that, hey, everything's going digital, everything is going AI, so he's just leaning hard into it and said, hey, if it's going to go that way, we're going to own all of it. So
what's interesting to me too is Trump is determined to quit funding the UN and let that thing die.
Yeah.
But he's starting his own peace program in Gaza. And when I first heard about this, my first thought was, I'll bet that Gaza isn't really the issue. This is just an opportunity. He's got much bigger plans for the Middle East and for the whole world. What's your thoughts on that?
I was pretty dismissive of the Board of Peace initially. I really was. And once I guess right before he came out in Davos, and once we started realizing that this is going to be more than just a Gaza rebuilding project board, that they had global aspirations. It was $1 billion buy-in for a permanent seat that's going to build the war chest for, just starting out. And we pulled out of 66 United Nations organizations. We've pulled out of the World Health Organization. What is the United Nations? It's like a debating club. I mean, really, that's all it is. They get up there and they beat their chest. They talk about whatever, and then nothing happens. So I think Trump is all about the movers and the shakers right now, and who can actually make stuff happen efficiently or the most efficiently. So, if you're going to play devil's advocate in that role, I guess, if you're Satan and your time is running out, Israel's a nation again. They've reconsolidated Jerusalem under Jewish control. They've been dominating in every conflict they've been in. They've been supernaturally protected, economically empowered. They've had the United States as their kind of big brother watching over their back for the last, 5 years now. He knows that he's running out of time. So if he's going to build his empire very quickly, he's not going to do that with a Kamala Harris and a Tim Walz. I mean, Democrats had their purpose, right? They were good at corrupting the nation. And basically, if you want to destroy a nation, you just put Democrats in charge or whatever, and they'll ruin it really fast. But he needs infrastructure built for this global empire, and there's nobody that can build it faster than Trump. So I'm not saying that Trump is willingly building this, because he's blinded by his lack of Bible prophecy. He's blinded by his own hubris and his own problems. There's a lot of things that he does right and he does good. He shut the border down. That stopped the flow of human trafficking, child trafficking, fentanyl. I mean, there's a lot of good things that they do. And there's a lot of things that I'm scratching my head. I'm like, why are you doing that? Why are you telling Israel they can't reclaim their homeland, the middle of their country, Judea and Samaria? Like, why would you tell them that when we would never allow us to be that way? You know what I mean?
Yep.
So not only that, but Project Stargate, the Genesis mission, all this stuff he's doing. I'm like, dude, have you not read Revelation 13? Have you not read the Bible? I mean, come on, you're basically building the infrastructure for the Antichrist. So,
well, it's interesting too. I've never been starting in the 80s. The common theory was the UN is going to take over the world, and the UN is going to divide the world up into 10 pieces. And I was never quite comfortable with that theory. It's even still popular in some circles today. But I wasn't comfortable because the Antichrist and the 10 toes come out of Rome. And then that original group dominates the whole world. So it's Rome that dominates the whole world. But what's interesting, if America is not donating to the UN, how long can it go before it collapses? And that UN building in New York City is empty.
I've said for a long time that I thought the U.S. was going to get out of the United Nations a long time ago, and I thought we should have divorced NATO along. We should have ended NATO back in the 90s. I mean,
Yep.
NATO, the whole purpose of NATO was to stop the spread of the Soviet Union from spreading their influence everywhere. So once the Soviet Union collapsed, we had a small window of time where things could have been very different had they shut NATO down. But the Democrats took over, and Clinton took over. Basically, he was just talking out of both sides of his mouth to Boris Yeltsin, and then I forget the other folks that were in power there at the time. But they had a small window of time when they could have brought in Russia into the fold and made them something different than this pariah that they've become. But again, the NATO should have been ended then. And so I've thought for a long time, knew that NATO is going to change into some type of European defense force. It's going to change into their military. They're just going to change the patch on their shoulder and call themselves something different. But basically the infrastructure is there. The leadership is there. The headquarters is there. Yeah, the U.S. is funding everything, and the U.S. is the bulk behind the money and the power. But if the U.S. were to collapse after the rapture at some point, I mean, don't you think those guys would just start making shopping trips over to the United States and like it's a Costco or something?
Yeah. The other thing that I've often thought about too, a slightly different scenario would be if the U.S. just pulls out of NATO, just makes an ultimatum. NATO says we can't meet those terms, and then the U.S. pulls out of not only the UN but NATO. This is a massive, massive change that would rearrange Europe in a hurry, and it would. It's interesting to watch this stuff going on, because I think some of this stuff, like Trump's board of peace going the direction it's going, I think it caught some people by surprise. But I think also America threatening to leave NATO has also caught some by surprise.
Yeah, and even their the head of NATO was saying, like, he was on a panel up there in Davos, and they were talking, and he's like, do you think that you think the U.S. can protect themselves without the United States? And he's like, you're idiots if you think that. Because it's not, we can't. There's no way. Yeah. So anyway,
well, here's an interesting thought. Be interesting if you've had your own thoughts on this. I could see a scenario here in the future where Trump has had talks with China and Russia and has said, you know what, you let us have our way in Europe and the Middle East, and let us have our way in the Western Hemisphere, and you go ahead and do whatever you want with Europe and to Russia, and tell China you do whatever you want in Southeast Asia. Just I don't know that it would go that way, but that is a scenario that I've envisioned.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, I think if they were to come to some type of agreement with Russia that there's a cessation of fighting, however that ends in Ukraine.
Yep.
Russia kind of retreats back into the motherland, the U.S. and the world, because he's going to be brought back on this board of peace. Putin bought into this. The Russians got a permanent seat. So he could say, look, you guys, if you leave Ukraine, we will bring you in the fold on this new board of peace. You won't be the global pariah. We won't have embargoes against you like crazy. It'll be better for you. You don't need those little, the Donetsk and the little borderlands there. He goes, you don't even need that. You can just take the land that you've already acquired, and we're going to have to sweeten the deal, sweeten the pot for Zelensky, and make him some kind of offer that he can't refuse. And then they end that. And then I could see the U.S. Kind of not disbanding NATO, but they're going to reflag it and call it the United Defense Force.
Yeah.
Or whatever, the Euro Defense Force, whatever they're going to call it. See, there's a thing too. Retro is very popular, right? I mean, everybody loves retro things, and nobody loves the EU. It's just a bureaucracy. Who gets excited about a bureaucracy?
Yep.
But if they were to rebrand the EU the new Roman Empire. I mean, dude, and bring back the uniforms and some of the helmets and like the like they. I'm telling you, that would be very, very popular. Right? What's that?
At least if it was for ceremonial stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it would be very popular, and I mean, dude, people would be all about that. Not everybody, obviously. I mean, there's going to be holdouts, but I think on average, it would be a very popular move for them to rebrand themselves as the new Roman Empire or something.
I saw a YouTube interview one time with a guy, and it was just a brief snippet, but he had asked hundreds and hundreds of American males, bumped into him on the street, and just asked them, how often do you think of the Roman Empire? Once a day, once a week, once a month, never. And almost to the man, they said once a day, at least once a day.
Yeah. Yeah, it's inundated in our culture. It's popularized in our movies. It's glamorized. It is Europe in their heyday. It is
Yep.
It is like making Europe great again, like mega. So
Yep.
if they could, all Europe really needs is a charismatic leader that can lead them out of the morass, be he God or devil. Quoting
Yep.
that guy from the 1950s. But they need their own. They want their own version of Donald Trump. But whoever that guy is going to be, he's going to be able to speak multiple languages. He's going to make Trump look like a child in terms of speaking or oratory skills, but also be charismatic and charming and winsome and probably very good looking, et cetera, et cetera. So, kind of like a James Bond type of guy that is able to really just win people over, but also be a pragmatist. He's got to be a pragmatist. He's going to have to be. And he's probably alive today, and he's probably not anybody that anybody's looking at right now. So I bet he's there. He's alive. He's just in some staff section in some, whatever government, just filing papers right now or doing whatever. Just like Hitler, man. Hitler was he was a private or a corporal when he got out of World War I, and he became a house painter.
And he was a desk clerk part of World War I.
Yeah. So you never know.
Yep, it's going to be interesting with some of these things, where our thoughts go with the Roman Empire, with America's part in it. Will we not be there? Will we be part of the body? Will we be the little horn leading the whole thing? And then you have all the ramifications of Europe and how Russia's going to fit or not fit into the picture, and especially with the Gog and Magog stuff. Well, I can just imagine after the rapture, we're all sitting around in a coffee shop in heaven, just having a good time, just going through all the current events that are happening that we get to watch on big screen TV and glory, and realize, okay, Pete, you were right in this one. Oh, Mondo, you were right here. That's pretty crazy.
Yeah. Somebody's going to owe me breakfast tacos. I know that.
Oh, my goodness. Well, are there any other subjects on this that you want to bring up? I mean, we didn't really talk much about AI or quantum computing, and that's really going to be a huge, huge part of this domination in the future. I mean, maybe I'm overestimating the value of this, but it seems to me that whoever comes to the top of the pile and really comes out with real quantum computing that's not just you've got one or two things you can use it for, but you've actually mastered it. You have 150 different algorithms that you can use it with on different applications, military, technology, medicine. Whoever comes out on top of the AI quantum computing pile first is going to dominate the world. They can shut down everybody else. They can hack everybody else, and nobody can hack them.
That's what Stargate and Genesis mission is all about. It's throwing everything we have. It's the new arms race. It's like in the 1930s, other nations we weren't the only nation trying to split the atom. I don't think. I mean, I think the Germans were trying to do it. I'm sure the Russians had some segments of their society, their government forces dedicated, probably not to the extent that we were, but that was the race. It was the race to split the atom, and Oppenheimer and his guys in New Mexico were able to crack the code first on that. And, this time around, we've got the Chinese are competing against us, the Russians. I mean, Putin said back in 2017 that whoever develops this ASI first is going to win. It's going to control the world. So at least since 2017, world leaders have been talking about this.
It's interesting how once you get your mind wrapped around asymmetrical warfare and economic warfare and technological warfare, and you begin to realize the biggest battles that we're fighting right now, it's not on the normal battlefield that we think of.
No. And I mean, the battlefield, the moment when a soldier's boot touches the ground, that place would have already been hit by 15 different things, cyber attacks, energy attacks, misinformation campaigns, the whole 9 yards, right? So the idea is to who's going to, we live in the age of information, right? We have for the last, I don't know, since the 1960s or 70s, since computers became a thing, and since mass media and the propaganda through the media project, Mockingbird, etc. We live in this age of information, and now we're trying to figure out who can compute this data the fastest and secure it the longest and get it to the most amount of ears and eyes across every spectrum or every medium rather. And that's the race. So you're right, whoever develops AI first is going to dominate the world. And so Trump recognizes that. He recognized that before he won the office the second time. And he's like, dude, we have to throw everything we can at this. And they are. So the Genesis mission is turning 15 labs, military research labs, full bore, focus on this. If you get this, we can get everything else. This is your priority. And so I'm sure other nations are doing the same thing. So it is a race. And
but I would suspect that no other nation is able to throw as much money at this and as many world-class minds as America is. I mean, China's pretty amazing at it, but I suspect that their budget's not a half of what ours is.
No. Yeah, not only that, but look at also the other factors with China. I mean, they've got Xi Jinping has been so paranoid about retaining leadership for so long. He's basically removed any potential rival from him, for the last 15 years. So he's basically just surrounded by yes men. And that's why his military is falling apart, because they don't want to tell him any bad news, even though their army's falling apart and their missiles are full of water and they can't even take Taiwan if they wanted to take Taiwan. So, so I think the U.S. is best positioned right now to really kind of win this AI race and the quantum race. So even when that's why Musk is I think this year is going to be really focusing on turning a lot of his satellites into solar energy paneled, collectors, basically taking the energy from the sun in the exosphere and then shooting that back down to Earth and radio waves to some base there in Greenland. You have free energy, not free energy, but he's going to control the energy.
Yes.
We would never need energy again in terms of, we wouldn't be dependent on anybody for energy ever again.
I suspect they're going to pursue some of these other clean energy alternatives, which are 1,000 times more valuable than solar energy even. I mean, if they pursued the hydrogen ion energy, if they pursued thorium, there's different things that they could pursue where you could have like nuclear power plant kind of energy, but there's no radiation.
Well, like Amazon and somebody else is Google maybe that are buying into the mini modular nuclear reactors to power their data centers.
Yep.
But if Musk can capture this energy from the sun, so look at the Romans, right? In the Roman Empire, the Mediterranean was their sea, right? And they didn't look at it like as a large obstacle. They looked at it as a road that they could take them anywhere. So they had a name for it. It's called Mare Nostrum.
Yes.
And our sea, right? Our sea. We own this. It can take us anywhere we want. We're going to use it. They want to turn the cislunar space between the Earth and the moon. The United States wants to make that our sea. We want to own that. We want to own the mining operations on the moon to get helium. 3, we want to get all of anything that we can pull from the moon that we cannot get on the Earth. We're going to control all of that. So if the Lord tarries and we're here for another few years, and we're going to start seeing this, that's part of what the Artemis mission is going up. The Artemis goes up in February, I think. And it's just going to do a return to the moon, going around the moon, getting us used to going back and then coming back to the Earth. Right. And then the next iteration of Artemis is going to be, I don't know, planting some type of a base there, drones, robots. And if you look at Musk, everything he's done in terms of his companies, a lot of it's geared to living off the Earth. The Tesla truck is designed to drive on Mars. The Boring Company is a tunneling company. I mean, come on, tunneling. I mean, he wants the tunnel. You got the tunnel if you move to Mars or the moon. He's got the Neuralink with the SpaceX, with the AI, the XAI. I mean, all of that stuff, the robots, Tesla, not just the Tesla vehicles, but the Tesla energy company, all of that stuff is geared to dominating space. And so the U.S. is like, hey, we'll fund you, we'll back you, but you have to make all of your stuff mil-spec compatible, and it has to be dual use. If we ever have to use it to protect the United States, we need access to that. And all the other companies, Amazon, Google, everybody else is 2 to 3 years behind him in terms of energy. But when you talk about quantum is not dependent on energy. It's more, it's more sensitive, and it takes a lot more until we can figure out a way to bring that to room temperature, like I think you and I talked about a while back.
Right.
But even cold fusion, that's something that had been laughed at for a long time. DARPA they just did something with it on X, like they're talking about it's theoretically possible now. So they've just admitted that it is. And so we're close to a lot of different breakthroughs that are going to change the way things happen here on Earth fundamentally.
Yeah, it's really amazing where this world is going and where the technology could take us. Here's another interesting thought. It's just been amazing the last 4 or 5 years to watch Elon Musk go from being on the top 100 to the top 10 wealthiest people to shooting past everybody else. He could be the world's first trillionaire in a few years if this keeps up. His increasing revenue stream, the way he scales up with his satellites and SpaceX, and his plans for using this technology to branch off into other technology that will also be sources of revenue. Mm-hmm. That's pretty crazy. He reminds me of Tony Stark.
Well, so long as he's on our side. I mean, if he ever were to flip sides or whatever, I don't know that he would. But I mean, I don't see him as the Antichrist, but I definitely see him as like one of the 10 kings because he controls so much. Technology. Yep. So everybody, even if Google and Amazon and these guys want to get the energy to power their data centers before their nuclear reactors are built, they're going to have to get it from him. So he's going to own the track. He's going to own the track that everybody else is running on. So he's generated this massive amount of wealth, but not even just him, but Palmer Luckey with Anduril. I mean, that dude's technologies is insane. Peter Thiel with all of his the Palantir system that's now being incorporated into a lot of defense systems, and that thing is scary. So they're rapidly building. Silicon Valley is building the infrastructure for the beast.
There's no doubt about it.
It's sad that they don't understand what they're doing. I mean, Peter Thiel is about the only guy that publicly talks about the Antichrist, but even still, he's really mistaken on like his understanding of Bible prophecy. He thinks that we can change our trajectory and then not have to go in that way. And I was like, no, once God has already said it, it's going to happen regardless of what you try to maneuver through. You can't maneuver around Armageddon.
Well, his approach to the Antichrist kind of reminds me of the Lord of the Rings, where you had all these weak men who were powerful men from the world's eyes, but they were weak morally. And their thinking was, if we get the ring, then we can use it in a good way. It doesn't have to be used in a bad way.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
this is where the whole world goes with all this technology and power. Oh, we're going to use it for good. We're not going to use it for bad. Well, one ring to bind them all.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Hmm.
Well, do you have any more, anything else you'd like to bring out before we move on to Q&A?
Yeah, I mean, I know I wrote an article just recently from Pax Americana to Fortress America. And the idea of Fortress America is something that back in the Middle Ages, if you think about it, it was this, you owned the big fortress and everybody lived outside of it, all the villages and stuff. And if you had to pay your tax to the king or the lord there, but when the enemy came, you got to run inside the walls, be protected, right? The U.S. is trying to make ourselves this fortress. And it reminded me of this passage by Daniel, or in the book of Daniel, talking about, let's see. He's a man that honors a God of fortresses there in Daniel 11:38. This idea of power. And then if you read Revelation 13, I think verse 4, like, who is like the beast? Who can make war against the beast? Like this, whatever this final iteration of man's kingdom, whatever nation it comes from and whatever place it hails from in the world, is going to be formidable in a way that we've never seen in human history. And that, to me, that means that they're going to crack the code on artificial superintelligence. They're going to crack the code on quantum computing. They're going to crack all of these barriers, and probably with help from the demonic realm. And they're going to be so powerful that there's nobody that's going to be able to rise up against them. And just like Germany, look at Germany in the 1920s. They were broken. They were a broken nation, a broken people, broken economy. In just a few short years, man, they turned them into a very fearsome, just terrifying army and terrifying force to be reckoned with. So I don't think it would take that long to do it, but like, I do think it still takes a little bit of time if it's not the United States already.
Right. Well, if you have a nation that's already relatively advanced, like Germany or France or England, they could easily in a decade build on what they already have and go an amazing far distance. But to me, to look at something like Iraq and say, okay, in 10 years, Iraq can dominate the world, I think I'm going to die from laughing.
Yeah, no, I used to think that the gap in time would take 10 years, and that was back in the early teens. So I thought always thought the second coming would be in the 2030s.
Yep.
But now that we're drawing closer, the further that we kept pressing into the future, the more advanced things are happening. I think that window of time between the rapture and the start of the 70th week is getting smaller and smaller. There doesn't need to be as much things that have to happen. But in terms of like Babylon, for instance, like, I liked your take the other day about, we always talk about having the historical, grammatical, literal interpretation. If you go to D.L. Cooper's Golden Rule definition, we take the text as it is, unless, by taking it literally, we make it nonsensical.
Right.
So we take it literally, unless taking it literally makes it nonsensical. Then you have to use the rest of the context, the surrounding context, to basically figure out like what is going on. So I like the idea that you brought up that if we're going to force Babylon to be back in Iraq, are we making it nonsensical? Because if you look at Iraq today, and for the last 30, 40 years, I mean, that place has been a dumpster fire.
Yes.
I mean, literally a dumpster fire. And even if you were to build a port, they've only built like 14 miles of it in the Grand Al Fal port area there near Kuwait. Even if you were to build it all the way up to like where Hilla is, where ancient Babylon used to be, to what end? I mean, to what point? There's nothing there. There's no infrastructure there. There's no nothing. There's no government there. But I do see, like, if and when the United States divorces the United Nations, I think that they will move the United Nations back to the Middle East somewhere. They'll move the headquarters back over that way somewhere. But even if it's still an agency, it may not even be an agency anymore.
Yeah. One way, I did think of one way where potentially our Babylon loving brethren could be vindicated. And that would be whoever the Antichrist is. Like if it's something super powerful, like America or Europe or some combination thereof. I mean, and you were given enough time. If you had 20 years, you could build up Babylon to have the infrastructure for the port, to have the infrastructure for the railroad, to have the infrastructure for the highways, to build it out to the Silk Road, and to build out the airport infrastructure so that you actually have that. But you not only have to bring in the banking and the infrastructure, you have to actually have mining, you have to have all forms of industry. And I would say that if a superpower took that on and worked at it for 20 years, they could make it happen. But to look at something less than a superpower taking that on and having it happen in the short run, it just doesn't seem feasible.
Yeah, I think I know that after the rapture, a lot of things will change.
Yes.
And not only will they change, but they can change pretty rapidly, I would imagine.
Yeah.
Infrastructure, though, is still infrastructure, and it still takes time to build it. It still takes time. So if you're Satan and you realize, hey, I've only got no more than 8 or 9 years to include the 7 with the 70th week.
Yep.
I'm not saying that he accepts it, but he at least accepts the premise that is a time frame that God's operating from, and he's got a smaller window of time now. Is he going to devote all of his efforts into rebuilding something from scratch, a desert nothing, or is he going to start with something that's already built?
Yep.
And we know from Scripture, from Revelation 2, that Satan's throne was in Pergamum. We know it was at Babel at one time, so I'm assuming that Satan's throne can move.
Yes,
place to place. So he's not pigeonholed into one particular geographic location. But I also would agree too that when you look at the statue of Nebuchadnezzar, that the whole body is Babylon. It's just in Babylon in different phases, right? And the same thing with Rome, right? We look at Rome from the Roman Empire days. It was still Rome in the Byzantine for the next 1,000 years. And then then the Western leg became the Holy Roman Empire, and it was considered the First Reich by the Germans.
Yep.
And then the Second Reich, and then all the other European nations that rose and fell in the times of the Gentiles, So I don't know. I'm not saying that it can't be back in Iraq. I'm definitely not saying that, because obviously it can. And this is not anything I would ever divide on anyway. It's like Andy knows that I just like, I don't believe that. I said, I've been there. I've lived there for a year. Like, I know the kind of people they are. Like, it would take more time than I think we have left for that to come to fruition. Could it be in some, we look at Babylon, the empire, the territorial empire. Could it be somewhere like in Kuwait? It could be. It could be in Kuwait, or like Abu Dhabi, or some place like that. I mean, sure, it could be one of those places that's already built, already has the infrastructure, already has all that stuff. So, or it could be the United States. It could be Rome. I mean, I'm kind of agnostic on this whole, where is it at geographically? I just think it can move from place to place. But I look at like Revelation 17 as the ecclesiastical, the spiritual component to Babylon, which you've pointed out goes all the way back to the Tower of Babel, even before, to the garden, where Satan's like, hey, you can be like gods, So that whole premise going forward is something that is the zeitgeist that's swallowed the world for all these millennia, and it's encapsulated in enraptured kingdom after kingdom, thinking that they're going to last forever, and they worship this god, and all their gods end up just changing names, right? It's the same god, the same demons behind these gods. It just changes identities all the way through, and it's been permeating every society, every civilization that's ever existed. So even the Jews dealt with this, when they would worship Moloch and Bel and Baal and all the other iterations of their gods or their neighbors were worshiping. So you have the spiritual component of Babylon, and then you have the physical manifestation of Babylon. And since the spiritual component wasn't confined to one location, and it changed faces many, many times, I don't think that the physical component of it is stuck in one thing. I think it also can change. And the statue obviously shows that change, that graduation.
Yes.
From the head of gold all the way down to the feet of iron mixed with miry clay. And even still, there's something in there mixed in there that doesn't mingles itself with the seed of men, that people are still wrestling with. Like, what does that mean? So I don't know.
No, I absolutely agree that I've often thought of it like there's three Babylons, really. There's the religious Babylon in Revelation 17. There's economic Babylon in Revelation 18. And there's political Babylon, which is the capital of the fourth beast empire. And these could be three different cities. They don't even have to be on the same continent. And then we know, of course, this religious Babylon, the Revelation 17, the woman that rides the beast, that gets destroyed in the middle of the week. And all that's left is political and economic Babylon, followed by the atheism, the worship of the Antichrist. But it's an interesting subject. And when we start thinking about this, I often think this is one of those subjects where we have our discernment and we connect the dots and we say, this is where I think the dots are going to lead us. And that's okay, as long as we don't hold our dot connecting so tightly that we can't be corrected by further information or challenged by further information.
Clarence Larkin, man, I was reading this the other day on my Substack Live, the greatest book of dispensationalism.
Yeah.
Over 100 years ago, he was wrestling with it. He's like, look, I'm not married to this one view. It could happen other ways.
Yep.
So even back then, people were wrestling with this, and they were like, it seems like it would be that way, but it could be that way. I mean, so it's we've all been kind of wrestling with this, and as time goes on and on, we start to see if this prophetic picture were like a digital picture on a computer, the pixelation is starting to come in. We're starting to get to see what it is a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more. And sometimes you just got to step back and we can see kind of a vague outline of what it looks like. I think now we're starting to see the parts and pieces of this infrastructure, especially with the technology component to it, really come into picture, and how this could, 100 years ago or 50 years ago, people were wrestling with the idea of how can one man control all the buying and selling in the world. We don't wrestle with that idea anymore.
Nope.
We can easily understand that with the technology available. Right now we're wrestling with how exactly, because there's so many different ways that it could happen now. So that's where that knowledge is coming in, where we're starting to see, and those that are watching and waiting and paying attention are starting to see the picture coming together. And I think that's the exciting part. The most important part to all of that is not necessarily where Babylon is, but when is Christ coming back, and where are we in relation to his coming? Are we ready for him to come back? Do we know him as our Lord and Savior? Because if you don't know him, none of this other stuff really matters. You're going to be left behind, and you're going to be stuck in a world that is absolutely terrifying. You don't want to be here for that. So the most important thing is to get right with the Lord now, today, and then the Holy Spirit giving you eyes to see and ears to hear and to understand, and an understanding. It'll start clicking and it'll start making sense. And I'm not saying none of us have it all figured out. I mean, I surely don't. I know you don't, and all of our friends don't. I know there's probably a couple of guys that think they do, but they don't.
Well, it just seems to me like the more wisdom and knowledge you actually get, you begin to realize more and more how little you actually know compared to what there is to know.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I used to think I knew everything. And, yeah, rude awakening many times.
Well, do you have anything you'd want to share with us for closing comments before we move on to Q&A?
Yeah. Just, we can recognize the season that we're in. I think we can all, everybody that's paying attention can recognize that we're getting very, very close to the end of this age and then the beginning of the next. And I think that in some certain people that produces a certain level of anxiety and apprehension, maybe not for themselves, but maybe for their friends or loved ones. I mean, even I do for that matter, because I'll look at people that I care about that I think, well, I know I've talked to them about it in the past and they just weren't receptive to it. They don't want to hear it now. Um, what do? We want the Lord to return, but at the same time, we don't want them to go through what's coming, and I think the best thing that we can do is to continue to pray for them and continue to try and be the salt and the light when you're around them, to let them see the love of Christ or how Christ has changed you as a person. And then for me, I think the rapture, the talk about, well, primarily the rapture, it's got to be some of those things that we pepper into all of our conversations, because I think the more people hear about it when it does happen, and even if they've rejected the gospel now, that could be one of those things that finally convinces them to say, man, he was right about that. I made fun of him because he believed it. And now that this thing has happened, and that's the whole principle behind why Christ always said, I tell you these things beforehand so that when it happens, you'll believe.
That's right.
And so I think if we present this in a very Christ-like, loving manner, reasonable manner, we don't come off like, crazy, like lunatics with their hair on fire, and everything is a panic, and everything is a conspiracy, everything is this, everything is that. And I think we just come at it very reasoned and be like, look, this is going to happen because Scripture says it happens, and everything else, the rest of whatever else Scripture has told us has come true, or it's gonna come true. So it either has come true already to 100% completion, or it's going to happen with 100% fulfillment. Either way, it's going to happen. And if we can trust in what Christ said and the things that Christ did and the apostles and the rest of Scripture, then we can surely trust what he has told us about the things that are going to impact our generation, which is there is going to be a generation that never dies.
That's an exciting thought.
And we happen to be that generation. So keep looking up, keep leaning into the storm, head on a swivel, all that good stuff I always go on about. But most importantly is getting right with the Lord and making sure that you have placed your faith in the finished work of Christ and his shed blood on the cross, because that's what saves you. It's not your works. It's not how much you go to church. It's not how much you give. It's not how good you think you are, or, any of those things. It is your relationship with Jesus Christ. Do you know him as your Lord? Are you sealed by the Holy Spirit? And I don't believe in once saved, always saved, but I believe that once you're sealed by the Holy Spirit, you're always sealed by the Holy Spirit. So if you're truly born again, you're never going to lose that. No matter, Christ paid for all your sins. He didn't pay for some of your sins. He paid for all of them. And that's the only way that you can be made acceptable in front of the Father. And the same, think about it this way, and I was thinking about this earlier, the same wrath that God exacted upon a Christ rejecting world, or, a God rejecting world in Noah's day, killing everything that had it breath, drowned it. And just this torrential, horrendous storm the world had never seen before or will ever see again. That same wrath was on us until we took on the identity in Christ. And anybody that is not right with the Lord right now has got this judgment hanging over their heads, whether they know it or not, that unless they take the free gift of salvation that Christ offers us, their fate is going to be unbelievably horrific, beyond anything that we could even conceive in our minds. I think about that guy that died the other day, Preddy, that protester.
Yep.
That guy was so angry. I mean, just to listen to him and all not just the clip where he died, but like all the other clips they caught of him, and all of the stories from his ex-wife and his parents, just like how politically polarized he became and ramped up, and he was just full of anger and full of rage. And then he dies, and he's waking up in this new reality where he's going to be forever separated from God in eternal torment and darkness. And then only for that to be thrown into, the judgment day and then thrown into the lake of fire. I mean, like, that doesn't sound like any kind of fun. No. Right? I mean, that sounds absolutely horrific. Like, I don't wish that upon anybody. So I think we should pray for these protesters. I think we should pray for all the people that we want to make fun of and mock because they're so woke or whatever. Like, we need to pray for them because, like, it is where they're going. They're so filled with anger. And I pray for people that believe that there's this political solution to all this. There's not. Trump is not going to fix the world. He's going to try to, but he can't, because the Bible says that this is the way the world's going to go, and it's the way the world's going to go, regardless of what we try to finagle politically or economically or militarily or any other kind of way. And, I'm thankful that he won a second time because I was tired of the open borders. I was tired of the rampant lawlessness, but I also recognize that he's just a cog in the machine as well, and he's not going to stop what's coming. So.
Okay, well, thank you for that, Pete. Let's move on to the Q&A, and I've got a whole string of questions here. The first one is, wouldn't Jeremiah 50:12 with Babylon is the hindermost nation, wouldn't that support America as we are the youngest or latest nation to emerge?
Wait, say that first part again.
So in Jeremiah 50:12, in fact, the whole of chapter 50 and 51 in Jeremiah, there's a bunch of material on Babylon. Yeah. And some people who hold that America is Babylon think Jeremiah 50 and 51 is talking about this prophetic future Babylon rather than the literal historical Babylon. And so that's the point he's making. It says that in Jeremiah 50:12, it says Babylon is the hindermost nation. So does that support America as we are the youngest or the latest nation to emerge? And
I don't think so.
Off the top of my head, I'd say I don't think so either. I'm not convinced that we see a spiritual Babylon in Jeremiah 50 and 51. I think those are references to the literal historical Babylon.
Yeah, and if you look too, I mean, if you're talking about Babylon being kind of forever destroyed or forever, not lived in, and I know there's a fulfillment of coming fulfillment that happens very rapidly, but the Babylon that in ancient Babylon wasn't destroyed rapidly. It was conquered pretty bloodlessly, actually, by the Medo-Persians, and then people dwelled there for a while. It just kind of fell out of use. It fell out of kind of collapsed from just becoming irrelevant, And you go there today, and there's nothing there. I mean, there's like little villages here and there, but there's nothing like what it was. I mean, so I think the Babylon that's coming and that's going to be destroyed in 1 hour in Revelation 18 is whatever that version of Babylon is, wherever that is going to be destroyed catastrophically in such a way that everybody on the earth mourns.
That's right.
What Jeremiah was addressing back then, I think, was more or less the Babylon at that time. I know there's prophetic correlations and stuff, but I mean, that's the big issue of his day was the conquest of, that's what he was dealing with. That's right. Babylon's coming. Don't fight them because they're going to destroy you. You just need to submit, and God's got this, and I can't remember the king's name that rebelled against that. So they ended up getting conquered 3 different times. But anyways, okay.
Lee, question number 2. What happened to your Pre-Wrath Rapture Answered book? Well, the first original edition that was published in the year 2000 is now out of print, and it's selling for exorbitant prices. I've seen it listed for over $200. I was hoping to have the modern remake done last year, and so much came up. My schedule got so busy traveling, and then we moved, and so that just threw a monkey wrench in the whole thing. I have been able to be working on it this year along with working on other books, and hopefully just pray, folks. Pray that somehow, some way, God will work that I get enough time to finish my rework. I'm adding a chapter to Apostasia. I want to finish the pre-wrath rapture, and I want to finish the fourth volume of My Planet Shaken. That's a big agenda for a year. It's not impossible, but somehow by the grace of God, I need to learn to thrive on 4 hours of sleep a night and get 16 hours done in an 8-hour day. So it's not impossible.
Better get busy.
Yep, that's right. Okay, here's another question. Ezekiel 36 verses 37 and 38 says God is going to multiply Israel again. How do you reconcile this with Romans 9:27, which says a remnant is saved?
We're talking about two different times though, because 36 is talking about leading into 37 about the regathering of the nation of Israel from the valley of dry bones. I think they have been replenished and stuff. I look at the last chapters of Ezekiel kind of chronological. So from 36 on, it's talking about the rebirth of Israel. 37, rebirth of Israel. 38, they're dwelling in their land safely, comfortably. They get attacked. Gog Magog coalition, and then the end of that, you go into the whole temple, this third iteration of the temple from 40 to 48. And if you talk to Jews, I mean, they look at the Battle of Gog and Magog as like the final battle before their Messianic age. So they're not using the New Testament; they're simply using the Old Testament, and that's like the big battle.
And that would lead them right into the Antichrist.
That leads them right into the Antichrist because they think they're done at that point.
Yep.
They don't have the book of Revelation.
I remember thinking about that thought, but it's kind of escaped me. So that's good to remember.
I had a lot of quotes that you can go back. I did one of my videos I did was like the war to end all wars or whatever, question mark. And I went back and found quotes all the way back to like the 3rd century and throughout the diaspora, through the Midrash, through even the what's the kind of pagan Judaism, what's it called? The Kabbalah.
Oh yeah.
They all looked at Gog and Magog as like their version of Armageddon. They thought that after that, the Messiah would come and everything. Because really, when you read Ezekiel, it goes from Gog, Magog, and then it goes right into the temple. So they're doing temple stuff for the next 8 chapters. So
yeah, that's really a fascinating thought to think about that. There's so much that's setting the Jews up to receive the Antichrist. I mean, one of the things is in their own Talmudic writings and in their own rabbinical thinking, the Antichrist is not God manifest. I mean, the Messiah is not God manifest in flesh. So he's just a human being. And so when the Antichrist sits in the temple and declares himself to be God, that's going to throw them for a loop. How did we embrace this guy?
Yeah. And that's the real problematic thing that I have when you talk to Jewish people about this. They look at our New Testament like we look at the Book of Mormon, right? They just don't accept it. They don't think there's any validity to it. Yet there's so much that it's going to happen to them that if they would just turn the page from Malachi, well, they'd have to get a whole new Bible. They don't have that in their Bible, but turn the page from Malachi to Matthew chapter 1, and it would just hit them in the face like how Jewish the New Testament is. And like, look, this is all about your Messiah. This is the only time he could have come, is in that small window of time from 5 BC to 33 AD. And it's frustrating. It's frustrating to share with them, and they won't. They're blinded. They've got that partial blindness on them, just like Paul talks about. But there will be a remnant saved out of it. And like Olivier Melnick is want to say that, we get that percentage of 2/3 will be destroyed, 1/3 will be saved, but we can affect that percentage. It could be a small 2/3, or it could be a very large 2/3, so the more we share now, the more the smaller that 2/3 gets, in terms of size numerically.
That's right. Here's a question for Pete. Reports say the UK plans to give away Diego Garcia. Do you think it will happen? And how would this impact U.S. military capabilities?
I heard about that. Yeah, I don't think it's going to happen. Um, I think that that would be very problematic to Trump. And so I think he was very upset. I think they'll be able to convince the UK not to do that. So, but yeah, I mean, if we're going to focus back in on the Western Hemisphere, it may be one of those things like, okay, well, but no, we've got too much. We've got too many assets in the area, in the Philippines, Guam, Okinawa, South Korea. I mean, that's part of the whole reach that we have in that region to be able to reach out and touch people. So I think they're going to convince the Brits to keep it or give it to us, sell it to us.
Here's a question for me. Lee, do you think Turkey is Magog? I've been hearing a lot recently that Russia is Magog because of the Roche connection, but I see that being highly unlikely. Well, myself, I don't think it's highly unlikely. Rosh, Magog, Tubal, and Meshech were all Scythian nations. All those Scythian nations, with an influx of various generations of Scandinavians, mingled together and became the modern Russian people. They got their name Russia from Rosh, and they still have Roscosmos, which is the Russian space agency. They still have different companies like gas companies with Roche in their name. Magog um, is doesn't has a lot of place names, but not any major cities that I'm aware of. Meshech gave its name to Moscow. Tu, Tubal gave its name to Tbilisi and to Tobolsk. So these names are all over there. Now, what happened is all these Scythian nations, along with the Scandinavians, the Gomerians or Cimmerians, and the Gauls, they all came down and colonized all over Turkey and all over Europe. At one time, there were three Gauls. There's a Gaul in Spain, a Gaul in Italy, and a Gaul in Turkey. But nobody thought one of those Gauls was the homeland. Everybody knew that the homeland of Gaul was in France, and that's why the Gallic Wars were fought largely in France. Same with all these Scythian nations. Their homeland is north of the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea, all the way up into Siberia, all the way to the Baltic Sea and all the way to the Arctic Sea, and east all the way to the Wall of Magog, which is one of the ancient names for the Great Wall of China. So you have all these nations up there. It's colonies in Turkey. Turkey was the first great melting pot. That's where all the Scythian nations came down, had colonies. Germany came down and had colonies. Gomer. The Gallic people were there. The letter to the Galatians was written to the Gauls. In other words, it was written to the Frenchmen, the original French. So I think it's very likely that because Turkey is a melting pot of all these Scythian nations and the Scandinavian nations, I think that not only are we going to have Russia and Iran in the picture, but Turkey will be in the picture too, because she's a mixture of all of these nations that are involved in this picture. That's how I put it together. Got any thoughts on that, Pete?
Yeah, what you said.
Okay. Here's an interesting question. Where are we getting the money when we owe China $2 billion? Well, it's probably more like 2 trillion or more, but we do owe China a lot of money. But what's your thoughts on this, Pete? Is this debt is a crushing debt to America, or do we actually have the upper hand?
Well, we have a printing press, a bunch of them, and then we have the ability to. What I think we should have done a long time ago is something that Trump brought up, was this idea of looking at our assets. You know, you have debts and assets. That's at least how banks look at you. You know, what assets do you have to put on the table for this loan, or for, whatever, to secure this loan, et cetera. So the U.S. has got assets out the wazoo. I mean, we've got land, we've got water, we've got minerals, we've got oil, we've got natural gas, we've got, I mean, tons and tons of stuff. So I don't think that I'm not as worried about the debt as I used to be with regard to when you look at it compared to the assets that we're holding in as our cards in our that we're not showing. I guess they're showing, but we haven't really played them yet, right? We never looked at our assets as something to monetize in terms of we didn't look at them as assets, first of all. So we only looked at the debt, and when you're only looking at the debt, you become very disenfranchised, and you can't shake out the size of how big that is. But in reality, we have more assets than we have debt. So I think that's how Trump is looking at all of this now, and how do we leverage that and turn the tides on the way things have been going. And he started that with the tariffs, and then he's starting to look at it with what will come of this new energy deals in space. And that's the whole idea of this fourth empire is turning America into a country that nobody can live without. And realizing that we did that in a micro scale in a way with the petrodollar, by pegging the dollar to OPEC's sale of oil back in the 70s. And that we could kick that can down the road a little bit, but when everything is revolving around one thing, like a dollar, that thing becomes the most abused thing, and that thing becomes kind of worthless once you have 38 trillion of those things running around everywhere. So what do you do next beyond that? What can you do? Well, you lean on your assets, and you lean on your ability to harness technology and energy and make everybody else need to come to you for it. So you're the only game in town, or the only legitimate game in town. So that's what Fortress America is all about.
One thing too that people need to understand in our debt to China, they've bought a lot of U.S. Treasury bonds. That's how we expand our money supply, or it's one of the ways in which we have. But there's a trade-off here, because if China says, "Hey, we want you to buy the bonds back now," America has the upper hand. All we have to say is, fine, you want the buyback? Okay, we're done buying anything from China. Zero imports. China would implode in 6 months. They can't play that game with us. We have the upper hand.
Same with Canada.
We're forcing them to buy treasury notes, basically. You don't buy treasury notes, we don't trade.
Same with Canada. I mean, like, we export, I've heard anywhere from 3% to 17% of goods to Canada, but they import from us, or sell to us, export to us, 60 to 70% of their economy comes down to us from things they sell and make. So if we give them 100% tariff, it crushes them. So they immediately have to fold on that. So right now, in terms of customers, we're really the world's customers. And so you take that and you leverage that, right? And then you leverage the tariffs so that businesses that had went overseas, because it's cheaper to pay a Chinese guy, $1 a month, or $1 a week, or whatever they're paying them, and not have to deal with the unions or healthcare and all that stuff. But you're getting a crappy product back, but you're also putting yourself over a barrel, because now you don't control whatever that widget is. So by implementing a tariff up to a certain percentage, those companies are now starting to lose money. It doesn't have to be 100%. It could be like, say, 20% tariffs. And now it's less cost effective for them to have that factory in Beijing or wherever. And now they just bring it back to the States. So now they're going to be making money, where there's before with the tariffs, now they were losing money. So I
think it's part of the plan to bring a lot of manufacturing back to America, especially basic materials, infrastructure, and steel infrastructure and mining. Bring it back to America so we're not dependent on the rest of the world, especially not dependent on China.
The steel industry is coming back unbelievably. So it's crazy.
And so it's really, if you stop and think about what's going on, people are just getting panic stricken over all the tech giants are dropping 5,000 here and 10,000 people there. Hey, move to Pennsylvania, get a job in a coal mine or get a job in a steel mill. Your cost of living will be lower than California, and you'll actually make a pretty decent wage.
Yeah.
Okay. What's the relationship between climate change and labor pains? Or is there one? Is the climate change just a joke?
Are we talking the political climate change or like legitimate, like the poles flipping and storms getting stronger and, this, that, and the other?
I think they're talking about, I think they're talking about political climate change with global warming. And then when I was a kid, it was global ice age and then it went to global warming. And now we got global climate change, which is kind of a nebulous term, but.
Yeah. I think we know that there's going to be signs on Earth. There's going to be earthquakes in various places. There are going to be pestilences, famines. There's going to be the natural cycle of the Earth is beginning to speed up, and the birth pangs in terms of nature is getting stronger. They're coming on stronger and faster and more intense. So I do think that that's happening, and the political world is trying to politicize that and cause and falsely attribute that to man-made global or man-made carbon footprints and all that, so they can make money off of it. So I do think that the birth pangs are happening, and that's impacting us in a environmental way. But it's fallen, corrupt politicians that are trying to capitalize on that and try to make money off of that, and trying to say that it's not because God's causing this or that we're at the end of time. It's because so-and-so drives an SUV, or there's too many cows farting out in this field, or whatever, whatever the case is, so they're trying to politicize that into this. Anyways, yeah. So I do think there's a correlation with real environmental extremes that are beginning to happen more and more frequently. I do not think that the climate change you hear about in the news has anything to do with anything other than a bunch of elite oligarchs trying to make money off of that.
Yep. And once you understand that weather and earthquakes and like cyclone and hurricane type storms, these are all electromagnetic phenomena. They're fueled by energy that comes into the earth from the sun. And there's when you have certain conditions on the sun, it sends more energy to earth, and that is dangerous. So once you understand that, if earthquakes are actually increasing because of this, it's also a given that storms are increasing. You can't get away from it. They're all related. Okay, another question. Pete, do you think Trump is going to remove Muslims who believe in Sharia law? Is he going to move them from the United States?
I think right now, if he can get out just the criminal elements of whoever from whatever country they come from, Somalia, Venezuela, Mexico, China, I saw today they evacuated a plane in Phoenix because this Jordanian guy was on a canceled ticket. He was traveling on a canceled ticket, had a bunch of money and a bunch of IDs and so I do think that there's going to be this great tension between now and the rapture between this clash of civilizations. And I think this is part of part of me thinks this is this idea of the iron mixed with miry clay, that you have these two civilizations that are just completely at odds with each other, and they cannot coexist together. I also think it may have something to do with technology and putting technology into the human body. It may also have something to do with these aliens or demonic entities that are posing as aliens somehow intermingling with people. I mean, there's a lot of different ways to look at it. Honestly, I don't know, but I just see this as part of the great tension that's ratcheting up tension rather here in these last days, and there's no way to get comfortable in with all of these just kind of polar opposite all being kind of crammed together. And so I don't know that he's going to be able to remove all the Muslims, but are they going to be able to ban Sharia law across the US? Maybe. I hope they do.
Yeah. Personally, if America was going to really follow America First principles, we would take every Muslim in the country, have them put their hands on in a lie detector test, and ask them straight, point out, do you believe in Sharia law and jihad? If they say yes to one or both of those questions, then they lose their green card, they're booted. If they're a citizen, they lose their citizenship, they're gone. Now, that will never happen. It's not even going to come close to happening. But I think you're right, Pete. If they at least get rid of the most criminal elements, it will go a long way.
Yeah, that will be a success for them.
How about this question? Is it okay for pastors and Bible teachers to use Chat GPT to prepare sermons or to prepare Bible classes?
I mean, I look at it like a tool. Like I look at Google or I look at BibleGateway.com or eSword or could somebody take a sermon off of Bible or like eSword or like a Blue Letter Bible, how they have those commentaries, and like completely plagiarize somebody's commentary from 1520, whatever. I mean, I think it all goes to the intent of what you're using it for and why you're using it and how you're using it. And really, ultimately, God is going to judge us, and God is going to look at what, even if you wrote the sermon yourself, but you only wrote it because you had an agenda, does that make that sermon any more valid, in God's eyes? I mean, I was listening to somebody the other day, maybe it was Scott Townsend, we were talking about it. And I think like there's I don't know, it was, I don't know if it was Jack Hibbs or Tom Hughes. Somebody was talking about like how we've gotten so accustomed to getting our Bible online or getting our Bible on our phone. How we don't necessarily have that same need to have that recall because we know we can just pull out our phone and look up the verse. I don't need to memorize it. You know what I mean? Yeah. So I think technology and every flavor of it can be abused and used and abused, or it can be used like a tool, or it can be used and abused as something to profit off of, or to do whatever, So I don't know. I mean, I use AI for my art, I've been using it for years now because I don't want to, I was terrified of getting like copyright copyright strikes on, because we were just passing everybody's art around. Like you needed a picture of like the Four Horsemen or something for an article. And so what do? You go on Google Images and you're all looking for like, okay, Four Horsemen. And you go, oh, that looks good. And somebody made it, whoever made it at one time. Now I'm using their image, and now I'm subject to being copyrighted if whoever created it first or has the rights to it can come back and hold that against me. So that's why I started using that initially, just because I didn't want to have to worry about the copyright strikes. But I don't know. I mean, I look at it like a tool. Anything can be abused. So I don't think you should be writing sermons off it or anything like that. But
yeah, to me, if you're using it for research, it can be helpful. If you use it for art, it can be helpful. But if you let it drop a sermon outline, that's just like taking someone else's sermon outline. You really should be having your own heart exercise to come up with a sermon outline.
Yeah.
Here's a question. Why give the Iranian people hope and then not do anything? Is this a tactic of some sort?
I think I think something will happen. I mean, he put a lot of assets in the region, and I said this prior to Putin going into Ukraine back in January, I think, in was it 21 or 22? 22. And no, was it 21? Whatever year it was or whatever the year that war started. But Putin had all of his forces right there on the border for a few months. And Tom Hughes had asked me, I'm like, I don't know if he's going in, but it's very expensive to do what he's doing. And you're not going to just park your whole army with all of the logistics and medical and all the other stuff, infrastructure there, if you don't plan on doing something with that. It's one thing to park a line of tanks. It's another thing when you start putting hospitals behind them and logistics and warehouses and, like all the other stuff, you're going to do something. So he's moving whatever the carrier fleet is into that area of the world. I think he is giving them this impossible ask by saying, hey, we don't want to go in and do regime change, but here's how you can avoid it. Give up all your nuclear weapons, give up all your ICBMs, stop supporting proxy terrorist groups around the world. And of course they said, no, yeah, we're not going to do that. So he's like, oh, I tried. Now they go in and they're going to hit them so hard that they don't know which way is up. And I think the intent is that they're probably in the process now of fine tuning their strategic strikes of all the places their IRGC leadership go to hide, where Khomeini's going to go hide, where all of their missile sites are, everything, because the 12-day war was just kind of a really quick, hey, let's hit them as hard as we can, as fast as we can. I think this one will be a lot more protracted. I don't know that we'll put boots on the ground in a conventional sense, but I do think we'll probably have Delta Force, SEALs, those kind of guys on the ground to help the protesters, arm them and get them situated, or allow for Reza Shah Pahlavi to come back into power and set him up so that he can take over. I can see that happening. And that may be a multinational type thing because we may get help from other countries. The reason we haven't yet is because the Saudis and the UAE are terrified that, Iran knows that they can't hit Israel. They know that that's a really long shot to waste all their missiles on. But they can absolutely hit the eastern side of Saudi Arabia, which is where all their oil refineries are. They can completely wreck the global oil economy. So, I mean, he could have went in there a couple of weeks ago, and then they may have launched, let's say they launched a dozen or 20 different ICBMs there before we were able to stop those things, and they completely wreck oil. I mean, what kind of political fallout would Trump have at that point? We'd be paying $10 a gallon for gas.
Yeah, I think that Trump, after talking to his Arab allies, after talking to Israel, after talking to some of his European colleagues, that they convinced him, if you're going to do it, you better do it big enough to fix the problem right away, and you have to be able to protect your allies. You have to not only protect Israel, but the Arab allies.
Yeah.
Well, another thing that we've been moving over there in huge ways is our electronic warfare planes and our battlefield control planes. You don't just move those to a theater for a show of force. When you move combat control aircraft into a position and you move a bunch of them, that's there for a purpose. And when you move the growlers and the other stuff that we have for
electronic surveillance and
the electronic stuff, but also electronic warfare, shutting down their systems. These are expensive to operate, and we don't have many of them. And to move a vast chunk of them all to one theater, that's not just a weekend of practice and they're going to fly home.
Yeah.
Okay, here's an interesting question. Have you heard about Starlink satellites and Chinese satellites almost colliding, and Starlink had to go 300 miles lower than the 500 they were at? I hadn't heard that. Had you heard that?
No, but it brings up a terrifying prospect of they call it the Kessler syndrome, where you start having like this one satellite hits another and it creates this cascading debris field that now hits other satellites and then hits other, and like, you know what I mean? Like it would be pretty bad. So that will happen someday, but hopefully not soon.
Yeah, in the movies when I was a kid, you would see satellite warfare where one satellite's got a secret laser beam weapon on it and shoots another one and blows it up. You might have gotten away with that when there's only 8 satellites up there. But when you've got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, a little bit of debris the size of a golf ball could absolutely total
Mm-hmm.
uh, another satellite.
A screw traveling at, how fast is it traveling around the Earth at like 18,000 miles an hour?
Yeah.
A screw hitting a satellite, a screw like that big, a bolt, nut, or whatever, like that. I mean, you're talking about, yeah.
It could take out the space station or an astronaut working on the space station.
Yeah. So that's the Kessler syndrome. that's the terrifying prospect. That's another reason why they want to weaponize it, weaponize space. So,
the way you would have to do that, if you would have to have something up there that's designed to swallow satellites. Just sneak up behind them, open the big jaws, and just swallow it. Because if you didn't have a weapon like that, you're going to hurt yourself.
Mm-hmm.
The elites want to get the world population down to 500 million. That's roughly America's population. What are the chances they want to eliminate everybody but America? I didn't think we were that high. I thought we were just over 300,000. 300 million.
I thought, 340, I think.
Yeah.
I don't know.
We're in 160 million Europeans and South Americans.
I mean, we got rid of the Georgia Guidestones. I thought that kind of all went away. And then the Daigle report, remember the whole Daigle thing was like by the year 2025. And correct me in the chat if I'm wrong. I may be off. I thought it was 2025, but something like by 2025, they were going to reduce something was going to cause the U.S. population to drop down to a fraction of what it was. So,
yeah. Well, what's interesting about that is I suspect a lot of that stuff was actually real, but not a plan that all the globalists agreed on. It was the plan for some group of globalists or a guideline to follow. And I suspect that the real answer to this whole problem is there's probably a half a dozen or a dozen different globalist visions. Like China has a vision for globalism. Russia has her own vision. The Catholic Church has its own vision. Islam has its own vision. Liberal Europe has its own vision. American Democrats have one version. The American conservatives have another version. And there's all these different versions of globalism competing. And what's going to come out on top is the Roman Empire and the technocrats and the global banking. That's what's going to come out on top. Everyone else is going to fall to the wayside.
Man, I had a great quote on Rome. Here it is. I don't know who this person is. Katie Raybould. She says, I think it's a she. When America's founding fathers sought to create their new nation, they turned to the reliability and practicality of the Roman Republic. The founders drew inspiration from Rome's symbolism and everyday life, government philosophy, military strategies, and religious tolerance. The Roman Republic may have fallen, but her influence lives on through the heartbeat of the United States of America. So I don't know. I'm not saying that, I'm not building my argument on this because we have the Statue of Liberty, and I'm not saying because Washington, D.C. has a pentagram, in the architecture. I'm just saying, just looking at it from a purely realist kind of standpoint, there's no other nation right now that the whole world depends on. And for another nation to get to that stage where we are would take decades.
That's right.
So either we are it, or we are not in existence, and somebody just absorbs everything that we have and becomes us, or took over. So I do think the rapture will factor into that bigly, as Trump would say. The Deagle report.
Do you think Jesus might have been thinking of this war that is coming while he was praying in Gethsemane?
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I think he probably was thinking that on the Mount of Olives
Yeah.
and in the Olivet Discourse. I imagine Jesus, because look, I'm not even trying to say I'm anything like that. I'm saying I went to Jerusalem. I was there with some friends. They weren't Christian. When I was in the military, we're sitting on the Mount of Olives. We just happened to go up at the kind of the end of the day, and it was starting to be sunset, and we were seeing the sunset beyond the old city and the Dome of the Rock. All that kind of stuff was in that area. We were just sitting up there where all the tombs are, the tombstones, not they have those big above ground stone sarcophagus, all those things
Yeah.
up there. The cemetery.
The mausoleum type things.
Yeah. And so I'm sitting up there with them, and I was like, "Do you guys know what the Olivet Discourse is?" And they're like, "What?" And I got to teach them that. And as I'm sitting there teaching them, I'm just looking out over the old city. It was like the coolest experience. It was the most surreal experience I've ever had. And it worked out that way that day. And I didn't have my Bible or anything, so I'm just going off memory. So I talked them all the way through the Olivet Discourse. But I was thinking, like, imagine Jesus sitting there and he's just talking to his disciples and he's kind of looking out and he's looking through time. He's seeing all this stuff and he's trying to explain this in a way to them that they can both kind of understand it. He's given them the outline of what's going to happen, of the rest of time. So.
Question: why does Hosea 1:6 say God will no longer have compassion on Israel? And to what time period does this apply?
So Hosea 5:15, 6
Yeah,
chapter.
and they're quoting specifically Hosea 1:6. So
Well,
pull that up here.
I actually had it. I have my Bible saved to the chapter 5. Hosea 1:6.
Yep. So call her name Lo Ruhama, for I will no longer have mercy on the house of Israel.
Yet I will have mercy on the house of Judah.
Yep.
So he's writing this right before Israel is captured by the Assyrians, and they're scattered, and they call them the lost tribes of Israel.
Yep.
And Judah would come back, or they were spared conquest there until the 605, until Nebuchadnezzar came along. But even that was only for 70 years, and then they came back from that and lived there for another till 70 AD until the second conquest. And they were scattered a second time, and they were regathered a second time. So that second regathering is where they're never going to be scattered again. So the Israel that's there now, they're not going to be scattered. Even at the height of the tribulation, they'll flee. The remnant will flee to Petra or wherever they flee to. And you may have secular Jews that have taken the mark or whatever that are still there in Israel. And they're no threat to the Antichrist anymore once they've got the mark, because they're already damned at that point. So I think that, I don't know, I think that he was talking about the nation of Israel as it was then. They were going to be completely gone, wiped out. But even then, God knows where those lost tribes, they're not lost to God. I guess in their that current iteration there in the 8th century BC, that version of them now is gone forever.
Does our military have the advanced technology or advanced enough technology to reverse engineer UFOs?
I think so, yeah.
I think that's where some of our advanced technology that we've either got under wraps or that we're developing, I think that's where it's coming from.
Yep.
If our technology is so amazing, why do I keep hearing about dreams and visions about Chinese and Russians on our shores, and dreams and visions of huge water waves wiping out our coasts?
Dreams and visions?
Yep.
From who? I mean, I don't know. I don't know. I don't dreams and visions. I don't.
I've had myself. I've had a recurring dream. I probably had it 20 times in the last 40 years about being in a Russian concentration camp here on the shores of America. But what I have learned about dreams is most of our dreams are not direct revelation from the Lord. They're our active imagination ruminating on our fears and our hopes. So I don't put any stock in dreams about China and Russia conquering America. I think it's just our fears that are thinking about this and ruminating on the subject. And the, if America is going to be conquered and we're going to be in camps, our mind is going to picture it in something like China or Russia because that's the big things we're afraid of. But it could just be regular FEMA camps if there's any revelation at all there. But I wouldn't see any necessity to regard those dreams as revelation. I think 99.9% of all of our dreams are not revelatory from God. They're not illuminatory from God. They're just a hyperactive Christian imagination. Now, I have had a few dreams myself, which I do believe are from God, but only a very few. And they were all just guidance or insight into the direction of my life. Never had anything that was a thus saith the Lord revelation about the future.
I would agree.
Okay, well, that is the end of the questions.
What?
Yep. We had 16 questions today. We flew through them. And any other questions that are left over, they're going to store them for another live stream another day. Well, brother, do you have anything you want to say in closing?
You know, I did, and I had some notes written down, and I'm trying to think where I put them. Oh, I know what it is. There's a lot of correlations between the first century when Christ first came and our century, the 21st century. A lot of correlations, and I wrote about this in the fullness of time. If people want to go through the whole, the exhaustive, thoughts that I put in there. But the big thing is that in the first century, there was a very dominant Gentile world power, the Roman Empire. Here in the 21st century, we have another very dominant, the most dominant Gentile world power that's ever existed. In the first century, you had a apostasy that was rampant within the religious organization of the day. In Judaism, it was legalism, right? Legalism was killing their faith in God, and also they ended up crucifying their Messiah because of legalism. And in the 21st century, we have this Laodicean age that we're in, where we've got 40,000 different kinds of denominations and sects, and all the different groups out there. There was a messianic expectation in the first century. There's a messianic expectation in the 21st century. The correlations in these things are startling. There was a long silence before Christ came. There's 400 years. Now we've had 5 times that amount of silence since Christ first was last year. So I think that we are the generation, and I think people need to take seriously this idea that we don't have much longer to go. And I'm not saying that to scare people. I'm saying that for us to be more sober about our faith and about the long-term choices we're making, and are we investing in this world, or are we investing in the world to come? So, given those kind of similarities and just all the other things we've talked about, I just think that we need to get busy about the Lord's work and really kind of just buckle down. And, it's going to get bumpy. It's going to get stormy, but just lean into the storm and just stay faithful in what God's called us to do.
Amen. Amen. Well, folks, I want to thank you all for coming. I want to thank my moderators for once again doing an outstanding job. Thank you, those who sent in your questions. And folks, just keep looking up as Pete encouraged you. Just keep your hand to the plow. Keep one eye on the work before you, and one eye on the glory that's coming before you, and just stay focused and stay uh, happy in the Lord Jesus. All right, folks, take care and God bless. And Pete, if you hang around for a second, that'd be great.
Will do.